Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Sustainable Supply Chain Podcast. My name is Tom Raftery, and with me on the show today, I have my special guest, Jag. Jag, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Tom, thanks for having me. I'm Jag. I'm the founder and CEO of Certa. Certa is a third-party management platform used by multiple Fortune 100 firms. Happy to, of course, go into it more, but great to be here.
Thank you. Do please go into it a little bit more because that was quite high level.
So, Certa is a third-party management platform that offers the full spectrum of compliance, risk, and ESG coverage globally for all types of third parties for large enterprises. So enterprises use Certa to manage third parties and specifically the compliance, risk, and ESG of third parties globally in 42 languages. What's different about Certa, there are other tools, but what's different about Certa is that it is truly a platform. So what we basically call it, all the modules are powered by the third party operating system. So it's very personalizable. Number two, it is truly AI driven and AI first. So what that means is, natural language is the way of communication for a lot of the platform, including configuration. And finally, it is proven and global. It is used by multiple Fortune 500 and multiple Fortune 100 firms, and it is used globally in 42 languages.
Nice. And I guess give me a bit of background and context. How long has Certa been in operation and why? I mean, what was the genesis of it? Did you wake up one morning and say, I know I should start a company and call it, and okay, when did it kick off? Why? And the name, where did that come from?
Yeah. So, previously I was a consultant at McKinsey, and there I noticed just how hard it was for firms to work with each other. And it was shocking for me that it was taking, 3 to 6 months for firms to get onboarded. And when I sort of started peeling the onion and digging deeper, I understood that there are multiple functions within the enterprise that need to keep the firm safe from compliance and ESG and fraud and reputation, et cetera, et cetera. And it's the coordination across all these functions, and of course the specific automation within the functions that was taking the longest. And being an engineer, I kind of had a vision for, okay, I think I know how to fix it.
Right.
And that's what started with Certa. The reason why I was attracted to this field, Tom, is that originally I'm from India, and when I moved to the United States, I noticed just a higher standard of, if I might say, ethics and labor laws and focus on sustainability. That was just incredible for me. And, with Certa, I'm able to take some of that goodness from these large firms and spread it globally.
Hmm.
And of course, sustainability is a super important. We may not be around for much longer, if we don't solve that. But it kind of goes beyond it, right? It goes into labor laws, it goes into ethics, it goes into, equity, and it was just, I feel really fortunate to work on this really important and really, I think, impactful problem in the world.
Okay. So, and when did you start? How long is it? How long has
So,
Certa been in operation?
we had the first client went live about a little over 6 years ago.
Okay.
That's when, before that, I tried a few angles on how to solve this problem. And ultimately, after some experimentation, the approach of building a platform and this sort of, no code, AI enabled no code finally like fit and finally resonated with clients. So that's when, that's what started the journey. That journey started about a little over 6 years ago.
Okay. And what is it that you solve? for your customers?
The you know the problem is companies have tens of thousands of third parties that they work with globally, right? These third parties, you know, pose multiple risks to the company. Like, for example, compliance risks,
Mhm.
infosec, privacy, regulatory, sustainability, reputation, etc. Right now, these risks, if these risks are not managed adequately, even one of those tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of third parties could have catastrophic impact. We've seen, you know, we've seen some of those examples, right? Hundreds of millions of dollars of fine, the management of these companies being distracted, board level discussions on, caused by, not just like, one data breach, but, a privacy issue or a governance issue or a compliance issue or a labor issue. And it's just, I just feel like, it's such an important topic for, it's a board level topic now at large firms. So this is the problem that we're able to solve for clients. Clients are able to put a platform like Certa in place that basically solves, not only solves the immediate pain points, right, which might be something related to anti-corruption, anti-bribery, and AML, scope 3 emissions. So clients are able to put an initial platform in place with the confidence that the same platform can grow and cover the full spectrum of risks, the full spectrum of compliance, and the full spectrum of ESG needs. And and the platform is global, truly global. So you can actually, vendors, for example, from Japan can truly interact with the platform like it's a Japanese website. Yeah, they would have no English or German or Spanish they'd see anywhere, right? It's a beautifully elegant global solution. And it's not just the languages, it's also the business rules that are unique to each country. And CERTA is robust enough and proven enough that clients can go with the confidence that if a new regulation happens in China or Japan or in Mexico, the platform will be able to accommodate that. They wouldn't need to start looking for another solution then. So that's the problem that we're able to solve. The global supply chain at scale, multilingual, with all the nuanced rules in every country, with all the sustainability rules. It's the only platform and the most comprehensive platform and the most robust platform for that.
Okay, cool. And I'm glad you mentioned scope 3 emissions because they are particularly challenging. For most organizations, the scope 3 emissions are around 90% of an organization's emissions. And, so you've got that 10%, which is your own, and that's relatively straightforward to manage and reduce. But measuring, managing, and reducing the scope 3 emissions, because they're coming from your supply chain and your suppliers and your suppliers' suppliers and so on down along the line, it's got to be far more challenging. How do you deal with that, or how do your customers deal with that? What's talk to me about that.
Scope 3 emissions is such a hot topic right now. So let's dig into it, right? So like you had mentioned, you cannot make meaningful impact on your net zero goals. And almost every organization, I think every organization is on the path to net zero,
Hmm.
right? You cannot make any meaningful progress without tackling scope 3 emissions.
Yep.
Moreover, regulators like the SEC, the European CSRD are explicitly asking for scope 3 emissions because that's, regulators know this as well. Now, the way most clients estimate scope 3 emissions today is truly via using industry standards and pure estimation. So what that means is it's really hard for a firm, if you're just using sort of industry standards and just doing a rough calculation of your scope 3 emissions, then you don't know if the actions that you're taking are truly making progress.
Sure.
So to do that, you need to get primary data. You can't just rely on industry sort of estimations, right? So some of the forward-looking clients, what they're doing is solving this using the 80-20 principle. So typically, you know, 70-80% of your like scope 3 emissions are going to come from your top like 500 to 1,000 suppliers,
Yep.
right? So that's where, clients very smartly are starting. Let's solve this. Let's capture primary emissions data from our top, let's say 500 to 1,000 suppliers, okay? And we'll worry about the long tail later. The estimation for the long tail is fine, right? For now. Yeah, let's just estimate for the long tail and collect primary data from these suppliers. And that works really well, except that it's still a logistical nightmare. To collect data every quarter or every year from your top 500 1,000 suppliers via spreadsheets, because there are multiple layers to this data, right? Clients might need to collect, okay, what are the products that you're supplying? Okay, give us the individual components of this product. Okay, where are you sourcing these individual components that are going into the product from? So there are multiple. It's a pretty complicated hierarchy you need to collect the data from. So it's a nightmare
Hmm.
to collect it via spreadsheets. So clients, even to collect it from 500 to 1,000 suppliers, have these groups of people, and it's they need to spend a huge amount of money and logistical burden to complete this, and their vendors need to do the same. And can you imagine the vendors need to do it across every client?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's pretty bad. So what we allow companies to do is put this initial program of collecting primary data from your top 500 to 1,000 clients on autopilot. This is what I've seen as state of the art today.
Okay.
This is what the most advanced firms who are absolutely committed and investing in sustainable supply chains are doing, starting with collecting primary data from your most critical, your largest 500 to 1,000 suppliers.
Interesting. Interesting. And I mean, we talked about ESG as well. If I think about ESG, it's massively broad. And if I think
Yeah.
about the likes of asset managers, how are they adapting their strategies to kind of better align with sustainability goals, and what role does technology play in that?
Yeah, Tom, so similar to the regulations, like from the SEC for in the US and European CSRD regulations, there are different regulations that are coming up specifically for asset managers.
Yep.
I mean, if you can put sustainability in the flow of money, I think it's a very smart way to create an impact. So the regulators are realizing that, right? So the asset managers in the UK are subject to this regulations called SFDR, Sustainable Finance Disclosures, and there's a new regulation similarly for that's coming out of California, which basically is, California is the largest economy in the US. It has pretty broad implications to all over US, right?
Hmm.
So asset managers are also required to disclose to the people they raise money from. So what what is called their limited partners, right? Exactly what is the ESG impact of their investments.
Hmm.
And that's a pretty similar problem if you take a step back, right? So asset managers need to collect primary data about the ESG and emissions impact from their investments, which could be hundreds of investments, which is pretty similar to like collecting data from your top 100 suppliers, right, or top 500 suppliers.
Sure.
So it's a very similar situation with asset managers. They need to collect primary data from their top, from all their actually portfolio companies, and yeah, and that's basically the where the asset managers are going to. Asset managers are a bit further along that we've seen than enterprises
Mm.
in collecting this data, because this regulation, at least the SFTR regulation, has been in place since I believe it was last year when it came into effect. So you need to do it, and we many incredible funds have invested in Certa as well, right? So we see that from the portfolio company side of things, where we need to provide ESG data to the funds that have invested in Certa,
Right.
right? So it's a pretty similar dynamic here, and that's why we sort of I mean, from Certa's perspective, we help asset managers in a very similar way to the way we help enterprises in collecting primary data from hundreds of suppliers or hundreds of portfolio companies.
Interesting.
But you can see this is going into every field, right?
Yeah.
This is the future. You know, no longer rough estimations. They're not going to be sufficient,
Sure.
because rough estimations will not tell you the impact of your actions,
Yep.
because you're using industry standards. So how is your CEO going to know, okay, well, all these actions that we took, did it lead to lower emissions in the supply chain or not? You have to collect primary data for that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think even though it is a logistical burden right now, technology is solving it. And technology players like Certa are, stepping up. And it is a, I mean, Tom, it is a great thing for the world.
Yeah, and I got to think, if asset managers are looking for this information, does that mean access to capital is easier and cheaper for companies who can provide this information?
100%. So, I mean, I have a lot of personal experience with this now, having served a few asset managers, and, both our software is being used by asset managers, but also, we are providing this primary data to our investors, right? So, as a company looking for capital, or, has looked for capital in the past, if our ESG and sustainability, if that wasn't a focus for us, we would be much more limited to the number of funds we could take money from,
Mm.
because most funds now have a threshold, minimum threshold for, you know, I mean, data privacy, sustainability, labor laws, and all that, right?
Yep.
And this is great stuff, So, I mean, what I love about this is not just that it actually creates good in the world, but also that it's, the good investments are actually ones that are doing good in the world. So these things in business are actually pretty aligned. Folks, companies and vendors that focus on sustainability and equity in their workplace, and all the sort of good data privacy policies, etc. They are the ones who do well in the long term.
Sure.
So they are actually de-risking their investments, or just de-risking their supply chain by actually focusing on this. So it's not just meeting a regulatory need and doing good in the world. It's just good business. And that's actually what is our tagline. In Certa, we call it the mission of Certa is to enable firms to do good business. Because
Right.
good business is not different at all from sustainable businesses. It is the same thing. It's long term. It's If you focus on the long term, you will focus on sustainability. You will focus on labor laws. You will focus on data privacy. It's just good business.
Sure. Sure. And if I'm collecting data from suppliers, how do I know that that's actual data, not just somebody filling in, copy and pasting stuff into a spreadsheet and going, yeah, this is the primary data, honest.
Yeah. I mean, the data quality is and quality checks. We're still in early days of that,
Right.
right? So most of the firms are basically enforcing this via contracts. So asking the vendors or asking the portfolio companies to attest that this data is correct,
Hmm.
right? Obviously, that's not sufficient. So what some companies do is at least take a look across. You can basically do some standard deviation, right? So if one of your suppliers or one of your companies is claiming a huge reduction in emissions, which is way beyond the standard deviation, out into either side, then you can at least say, okay, well, you know this is something I need to dig into. What are they doing? Are they, so that's just a basic data quality, data cleanup that I think everybody must do, right? Which is just looking at the deviations, quarter on quarter, year on year, or like looking at, okay, benchmarks across the different suppliers. Like if one supplier is claiming a lot higher or lower than anyone else, what's going on there, right? Or one company is claiming a high, so similar thing with the portfolio companies. But you can also look at how does that benchmarking across your suppliers compared to their ESG ratings. So their ESG ratings could be, for example, we can look at ESG ratings from Equivatus, from S&P and others, right? And if there is a significant, again, incoherence between what the vendor's claiming and what let's say Equivatus is saying, or then I think there's again, companies need to dig deeper. So the way companies are managing this is via case management. As you basically, put some basic checks in place, looking at, standard rating agencies and looking at benchmarks across vendors and across portfolio companies. And then things that look odd, get flagged, and they go into a case management flow and you dig deeper into that.
Right.
That is today the state of the art in terms of data quality checks. Obviously, this is a fast evolving area using
Hmm.
AI, etc. A lot of companies are making progress there. We are as well. So watch this space. It's an important space. Data is going to get checked.
Yeah.
It is going to get more accurate. But I'm really glad that companies are taking and going on this journey with companies like Certa.
Cool. 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 And if I am a large company, what kind of factors should I take into account when choosing a platform like Certa?
Yeah. So I think that I think everybody understands that this is a fast evolving space. So, when you're looking at when companies are exploring platforms, I think the first thing that companies should look for is flexibility. Is this platform good for not only good for what I need today, but is it flexible enough as the world changes? Because it is the fastest growing or fastest changing area, I think, of any sort of discipline in business. Number two, pace of innovation. So, and companies can evaluate that in two ways. One is this company, the vendor that they're evaluating, the platform that they're evaluating, are they mainly a what have they innovated on over the last, let's say, 3 quarters, 4 quarters?
Right.
What is their level of investment in artificial intelligence? Because it's clear the future of not only this space but every software space,
Hmm.
every technology space. AI is the future, right? But also, there are some platforms out there, no matter how much they invest in AI, their architecture isn't sort of modern enough and robust enough to incorporate AI. So I think clients will need to involve their IT teams to really dig into the architecture and saying, okay, I know this firm seems to be investing in innovation, but I mean, if they have a technology stack that's like 15 years old, you really can't do much, right? So that's number two. And the third thing I think that companies need to look for is that is this has this vendor or platform and company shown the commitment to client success in the past? Because this is, being a fast evolving space, you need huge level of, like, a very deep partnership,
Hmm.
and you need the two, because things are evolving, things are changing, and you need this close partnership, and you need the vendor's commitment as things change to react quickly and have my back as a client. And I think that level of commitment, is this company going to stand by me personally for my, if you will, to make sure that I am successful and my company is successful. I would say these are the three top things: flexibility, pace of innovation, and is this company going to stand by me, truly stand with me?
Okay, cool. And, for companies who are embarking on this, how can they ensure that their supply chain partners align with their core values, particularly in sustainability and ethical practices?
Yeah, it's a great point that you raised, Tom, here, which is the point about values. This is what we're seeing across the supply chain. Earlier, it was good enough to find suppliers, who were, if you will, had, like, good pricing,
Hmm.
and if they were sort of keeping up with the laws, right? They were, had a, good standing with, all the regulatory bodies, and, if you could run basic compliance checks. But I think the world has moved much beyond that. Right now, companies want to do business with suppliers whose values align with theirs, right?
Yeah.
And I think, again, going back to the theme of, doing good is actually good for business. This is clearly good for business, right? I mean, that's the incentive here for companies to work with companies they whose values align with theirs. So, just in the initial evaluation now, Tom, what we're seeing is companies, in addition to the infosec and privacy and, sort of the, anti-corruption checks and all that, companies putting some of these sustainability questionnaires front and center. And that's become a very important criteria in getting business and evaluating who to give business to. So I think, for example, there was a recent survey, and I'll try to dig it up, where it said a pretty high percentage of clients, I think it was like higher than 40%, that have actively rejected vendors or disqualified vendors because of insufficient ESG standards. So it is becoming a real criteria like anything else, right?
Hmm.
So it's a part of the criteria. It's going to remain, more and more important. What what I really love is, consumers are reacting faster than companies in this case, right? So consumer preferences are changing clearly towards more sustainable retailers and more sustainable grocers and all that, right? And all these companies are really touting their sustainability benefits, like, companies like Unilever, etc., right?
Hmm.
I think the same thing is now happening in B2B. It's not just good business, but actually you can create a competitive differentiator. Suppliers can create a competitive differentiator by being more ESG compliant and friendly and forward leaning on those. So, I love this change that's happening. I
Yeah.
think it's becoming a part of the evaluation for supplier selection. It is certainly an attribute of which companies clients will give more business to, even from their existing suppliers.
Hmm.
So I love this. If it's not obvious, yeah, I'm a huge fan of this change in the world.
Yeah, likewise. Likewise. And, what would be, flipping this around, what would be kind of common pitfalls companies might face when integrating sustainability into their supply chains, and how would they overcome them?
Yeah. So I think the most common pitfalls that I've seen is aligning these all the way to the top. So, for example, what happens often is that companies get some vague direction from their board saying
Mm.
sustainable supply chains are important. But the to put this in practice, you need to break it up into phases. And companies that try to do too much at once, I see fail often. And companies that are not ambitious enough, aren't able to generate the excitement within the enterprise and sort of show the commitment clearly across different functions within the company to make sure that this is happening, right?
Yep.
So it's the combination. I mean, I think the best implementations that I've seen, Tom, of this are companies that are able to create a great strategic narrative and a vision for this is the way we want sustainable supply chain. So this is the way we want to be in, let's say, 10 to 15 years, whatever, right?
Hmm.
Long term. But these are the three initiatives that we're going to crush this year and next year.
Okay.
Okay. So having a good mix of both the vision and near-term priorities, works. Anything different than that? So, for example, if you create like a 5-year plan, those aren't really, because this world is so dynamic, this area is so dynamic. I don't think
Mm.
those work.
Yeah.
So, I think I really love this sort of narrative, great vision. Let's rally the company around it. And then these are the three initiatives that we must accomplish this year. And typically, those initiatives are depending on where the company is in the maturity of their sustainable supply chain. So if you're not doing accurate measurement, let's do accurate measurement of your scope 3 emissions. If you're doing accurate measurement, let's start getting primary data. If you're collecting primary data, let's make sure that we are able to do it in a in a more accurate manner, a more efficient manner. Let's make it easier for our suppliers to provide this data. So it's a journey. It's a maturity spectrum, if you will, right,
Hmm.
of sustainable supply chains. Yeah, and I think companies need to look at it in terms of moving along and taking steps in the near term along that maturity spectrum.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Where to from here? I mean, you said it's a rapidly evolving space, which it is. Well, I've seen that myself in the last few years, that the changes I've seen have been phenomenal, amazing. What's coming down the line in the next, let's not go out as far as 5 years, but let's say next year, 2, 3, 4 years?
Yeah. I mean, like most evolving spaces, there's going to be, progress will happen, not in a straight line, but,
Hmm.
like a little up and down,
Sawtooth.
right? But always does, right?
Yep.
So, I see companies committing to this, but at the same time facing logistical problems in implementing across supply chain. It's hard enough, Tom, to implement stuff within the firm.
Yeah.
It's much harder to implement stuff within your supply chain, right? So the only way to do that would be technology solutions and a combination of technology solutions and a clear vision and mandate from the company to all its suppliers, right? I think there is, I mean, the regulators are coming after it. So over the next 2 years, companies will need to make a choice whether they want to be leaders or in the middle of the pack or laggards in this area. So leaders will will be able to differentiate themselves competitively. Like this is an area where there's still room for differentiation, a huge room for differentiation.
Sure.
So I think competitive differentiation is totally possible, and the investments, the ROI is there on trying to be a leader in this space. Obviously, it's harder, right? Most folks are going to be in the middle of the pack. The laggards are going to feel a ton of pain
Mm.
because they're going to see declining customer demand. They're going to see, they're, I think it's just going to be a lot of pain for the laggards. So I think I would encourage, of course, if you have management buy-in in your company, I would encourage, sort of listeners to be more on the cutting edge of things it's an exciting area, and you know your kids will thank you, kids and grandkids.
Yeah.
You want to tell your kids and grandkids that I was there in this fight.
Yeah.
I led the way.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. We're coming towards the end of the podcast now, Jag. Is there any question I didn't ask that you wish I did, or any aspect of this we haven't touched on that you think it's important for people to think about?
I think most folks, most companies I talk to haven't fully, and it's hard to do, realize the ROI of this initiative.
Yeah.
I believe the ROI is really high, just because the being on the forefront of sustainable supply chains enables companies to, like we talked, right, have a competitive advantage,
Mm.
with their customers, have access to better talent,
Yeah.
because people want to work in companies that are more sustainable, more aligned with their values, right? And will have access to more finance options, and what that translates to typically is better financing terms, so your lower cost of capital.
Yeah.
So I think the ROI is overwhelmingly positive. Now, the sentiment, in the US goes up and down with ESG because of politics and stuff, but this is an unstoppable wave. Like, customers are demanding it. It's just going to happen. So yeah, I think it's very positive, high ROI. So I'm really looking forward to this next wave, and playing our part in it.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Jag, that's been really interesting. If people would like to know more about yourself or any of the things we discussed in the podcast today, where would you have me direct them?
Yeah, so the company website is certa.ai. So Certa, like certain, certa.ai. And I am active on LinkedIn. So I am J Lamba, JLAMBA, on LinkedIn. And of course, if you just want to email me, it's JAG, like short for Jaguar, jag@certa.ai.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Jag, that's been really interesting. Thanks a million for coming on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Tom. It's great talking to you.